All right. So my name's Ed Summers. Help out Rob with Rise a little bit. I work for Deloitte Consulting, but here for myself today, talking about covering your ass, cloud security. So this came about a while back. I was talking with Rob, and at work we're doing a cloud migration project. So for us, it's kind of a greenfield project. We run a small data center, and they decided, hey, we're going to push some workloads to the cloud. Hey, that sounds great. So we get some kind of ridiculous schedule, and everybody's hair on fire for the last year, but it's been a great learning experience. We're going to Azure. We're using the Azure cloud. Anybody familiar with Azure? Anybody use Azure right now? One, maybe. Nobody uses that. What about AWS? Anybody use AWS? Two, three. Okay, got a couple. All right. Hey, Grant, I didn't see you back there. So anyway, project deploying to Azure, and wanted to put together just a short brief on something related to cloud. We did one back in February on just cloud basics, some overview of cloud computing, and wanted to do another one on cloud security. And I kind of wasn't sure exactly what to cover with this, so this is kind of looking back at some of the lessons that we learned with initial deployment to cloud and some of the critical security postures and not methods, but critical security controls that you need to consider going to cloud. So I didn't want to come out with something like you're moving IaaS workloads or just VMs to cloud and doing security policies or firewalls. That's boring. Everybody knows about that. So we're going to talk about identity a little bit because that's a really critical part in your cloud security, and we'll see why in just a minute. It's going to be very Azure-centric just because that's what I'm familiar with. I'm not very familiar with AWS. I've used it just enough to set up some labs. The information will translate to pretty much any cloud environment, whether it's AWS, Google Cloud. The names of some things and maybe some of the features will be a little bit different, but I think the basic concepts will translate. And hopefully some of you that have AWS experience can kind of jump in and kind of give the AWS translation of what we're looking at in Azure. So I kind of skipped ahead about me. Hey, that's me. Been doing data center networking for about 10 years now. Before that, it was a lot of field stuff with DoD networks. A little bit of cloud migration now, really enjoying that. I think that's going to be a big future. Not an expert, learning a lot. Share what I know. You can be the judge at the end. That's what I tell my wife. I'm like, hey, big cloud security guy. Day to day, I'm Jeff. Who knows Jeff? Anybody seen Jeff? Yeah, you know Jeff. All right. Poor Jeff. Jeff's not around anymore. No. Yeah. So Jeff is DoD used to put out this cheesy cybersecurity program. Everybody had to take every year. It's like an hour long, sitting there listening to somebody read really slowly, and Jeff would pop up on the screen and tell you how good you're doing. He's the IT security expert in the basement there. So they recently retired that. There was actually news about it that they retired it. The animations were so bad that it made the news. So, but again, I'm just going to share my lessons in kind of cloud governance and security. All right, so I'm going to jump in. Quick example, because everybody likes to see something moving on the screen. It's some command line stuff. Not going to do a lot of that, but we'll show a little bit today. Let's take a look. Jump into an Azure subscription here real quick, and we're just going to see something that's contrived example, but it's just something to show why we're looking at what we're looking at here. So I've got an Azure subscription, and I have a Linux server here that I deployed some time ago, and I'm going to show here. Linux server's running, and I'm just going to SSH into the server there. It does not work very well. Lesson learned in presentations here. It didn't work at all. All right. There we go. It's going behind the presentation for some reason. Yeah. All right. So let's just let's go into there. And super secure password. Make Jeff happy. All right. So I'm into the server. I'm in as a user that initially set it up as, and when I created this server, I was kind of the root administrator of my Azure account. Okay, so I logged in as like a high-level Azure administrator and spun up this server. And basically, I just created one user on it. And we can, basically what I'm trying to show you is there's a few users on here, just the normal Linux users and stuff. There's an ed account down here. And there's definitely not one called bad guy. All right, so he's not there. So one of the neat things about Azure that you may know, you may not. In my account here, I'm logged in as a user called VM contributor. Okay. Now this user, they don't have any big privileges in Azure itself. So I can't come in and add new Azure users or anything like that. I don't have access to. But I can manage my virtual machines. So I'm logged in as somebody that can, maybe day to day, they're running your VMware environment, okay? They can spin up virtual machines, spin down virtual machines, make changes to them. The neat thing I can do with that, even though my account is not a Linux account on the system, I can reset passwords on the system. So Azure, part of the backend fabric, it has agents that run on these VMs and they can execute commands on the system as root. Which also means I can reset password and I can create an account called bad guy. Okay. Did it not? It did not like that. Okay. Sorry. Are you kidding me? Okay. A lot of work for a little demo. Anyway, so it starts a password reset. So basically, if you were a VM administrator, you could go into the Azure portal. If somebody locked themselves out of the system, the root account locked themselves out of the system, you can change the password, reset the password, or create new users with root accounts. And I guess we kind of expect that because your VMware administrators should be able to do this. You need some way to get into VMs. It's not a physical server that you can plug a console port into, right? So I'm going to let this run for a minute. While I'm letting this run, let's hoping it would go a little faster than that. Oh, there we go. All right, so it's done. And I can switch back over here to my server. And now there's an account on the system as bad guy. All right, so I called it bad guy. Contrived example because we're kind of a trusted user on the system right now. I'm a VM administrator. I'm kind of expected to be able to do this, right? Well, I have another Azure account. And this one's called User Administrator. So you'll notice this one does not have any access to virtual machines. All he can do, or she, is change user privileges. They can add user accounts to Azure, delete accounts, change passwords, reset passwords. Well, if I can reset passwords, I can find a user in the system that I would like to take over, like my VM administrator, and I can change their password, reset password. So basically I reset the password, it gives me a temporary one. What you should do is give them the password and they log in and change it. Of course, if I know that temporary password, now I can log in as that user, right? So kind of a stupid example, but it kind of leads into some stuff that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So just remember, you know, there is some trust, but you have to trust the people that, oops, first. All right. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what was it? Remember, you have a lot of power in the portal, okay? The portal is kind of like your on-prem environment now, and you have to protect the portal because there's a lot of power in there as far as adding users, spinning up machines, looking at data if you have sensitive data, deleting things, okay? Now with an on-prem environment, you have, you know, fences, gates, you might have guards, You have people looking around. I notice, hey, you shouldn't be here. What are you doing here? You know, well, the portal's a little different because the portal's online. You know, we talked about, if you were here in February when we're talking about cloud, that was one of the tenets of cloud computing, is that it's easily available. So the portal's online. You can't stop people from trying to log in to your account through the portal. There's a little bit more of an attack surface there compared to an on-prem environment, right? And you always have to worry about external threats and insider threats as well. And when I was putting together the brief, I actually came across a news story about a place called Code Spaces. This was a company that was, back in 2014, they hosted code repositories. They would host Git or Subversion code repositories, kind of like a GitHub or a Bitbucket would. And one day they came under a DDoS attack, and they were trying to mitigate this attack, figure out what was going on. And I don't know the full details of the story, but somehow they found a message in their AWS portal that the attacker had left. He left some contact info. They reached out, and of course it was some kind of ransom attack. Pay me so much money and we'll stop the attack. And they didn't want to do that. So they got back into the portal somehow. They were able to start getting back into the portal with some privileged accounts and start bringing things back online, or kind of securing it. What they didn't know is the attacker had left back doors. He had left additional accounts on there with privilege. And as soon as the attacker saw that they were trying to lock things down, things started getting deleted. And seeing that they're on the trail now, so I'm going to delete stuff. We're able to delete so much stuff. They deleted pretty much all their VMs, all their storage, and backups, offsite backups. Apparently, they were storing AWS backups in another region, but all that's reachable through the same portal. They were all reachable through the same accounts. He deleted so much stuff that there was no way for them to recover. Even if they could restore some of the data, they lost so much data that the money they would lose in insurance and, you know, paying out SLAs, it was just too much. So they basically shut down in 2014. But that's, you know, the moral of the story is kind of a couple of things. You know, it goes back to, you have to protect this portal, but also kind of tangentially, you might want to consider some cross-cloud backups if you're in the cloud, maybe, or some way to segregate that. Something to think about. All right, so we talked about all that. Let's talk about the meat of this. Any questions so far about what I've said? Okay. Governance. So probably lost about half of you right now with this, because it's probably the worst thing in the world. But I just want to touch on it really quick, because we spent a lot of time in our build out up front focused on governance. And what it is, I've got some examples up there, some quotes from several sites, but basically it boils down to, what are the policies and practices and regulations that you need to put in place to make your network or your environment work for your business? Okay, so we're talking about you need the processes and the standards that will translate to your daily business environment, to what you're building out, but also any regulations you fall under. So some things that come out of this would be like naming standards, or who needs access to what data, or who doesn't need access to what data, because that's going to change based on the environment you're in. So somebody in like the healthcare environment has some pretty stringent standards on some of their data. They can't have anybody just looking at private health data, right? So you know there that you're going to have certain user accounts that can only see this data, but other people shouldn't. What I'm trying to say is that if you spend this time up front and you look at the governance, the policies that you're falling under, it'll help you a lot later in really translating the regulations you fall under to the actual implementation. Okay, because you'll find that just like on-prem, in the cloud environment, there's a million ways to do things. It just depends on what you need to do for your situation. So I'm not going to make this a long thing about governance. Kind of a longish quote up here, but it reinforces what we're talking about. This is from a Microsoft document on protecting your cloud. And this reminds me of when we had Randy Marchani come in. It's probably about a year ago, I think. Was it? About then. He was talking about Virginia Tech, and he's saying, well, there's no such thing as a perimeter anymore, at least in their environment. The new perimeter is the user, it's the identity. And he's really harping on the importance of not thinking about these, what do they call them, crusty outsides with chewy centers anymore. It's really talking about securing the data and protecting the identities. And that really plays into this environment where your cloud portal that has all this power over your environment is accessible to almost anybody. So you really have to think about securing your privileged users and separating responsibilities. So when we're talking about users, I wanted to give kind of a quick overview of Azure Active Directory without getting too Azure specific, but and it's kind of a misnomer two ways, because Azure Active Directory is not Azure itself, and it's also not pure Active Directory like you normally think of it. So what is it? It's the identity management system or identity management service for Microsoft. When they went out there, I think they kind of decided that we're going to offer identity as a service, and then we're going to use that with our other offerings. So don't think of Azure Active Directory as Azure itself, okay? Azure Active Directory is Microsoft's identity service. Microsoft Azure is their cloud computing service, VM storage and things like that. They offer other services like Office 365, and that uses Azure Active Directory as well. Every cloud platform is going to have an identity system. AWS has their IAM. Google Cloud has something, I'm not really familiar with it. You can link Azure Active Directory with your on-prem directory, Active Directory, and it'll replicate user accounts. You can do authentication through Azure Active Directory to on-prem, use some of their services. Whether or not you do that depends on your situation and what you need. But again, the Azure portal, the Azure Active Directory portal is exposed to the internet, so it's something you have to take into consideration. You might want to keep your cloud identity separate and just use them for cloud tools and keep your on-prem Active Directory identity separate from that.
Is that what you guys do?
We did. We decided that in our situation, the cloud accounts, the Azure Active Directory accounts, were only for spinning up and managing the cloud resources. We actually deployed an Active Directory instance on virtual machines in the environment. So we kept our existing on-prem Active Directory separate from the new Active Directory. And we could do that because we're more of a hosting service. We're not using it for internal business processes. So the only reason we have what am I going to call it? An actual Active Directory virtual machines in the environment was for our customers that log in and need to manage their servers. So
you guys were offering it as a service.
Right, exactly.
So they really didn't tie into your AD as much as you were offering Active Directory outside as a service to be able to do whatever it is they need to do.
Right, and mainly as a side effect because they're logging in and they need to manage Windows virtual machines, and we need some way to push, security, group policy objects or things like that to the Windows machines. I guess it helps to step back. Our environment, we're a hosting provider, so we kind of manage the environment. We'll manage hosting services. So if somebody comes to us with their application, they want us to manage the virtual machines, we'll do that. But we can also just spin up VMs, give it to them, and let them manage it. So we needed some kind of Active Directory to link those virtual machines in so their admins could log into the virtual machines and run their management. But they did not need accounts in our cloud environment. They didn't need to spin up virtual machines themselves. So we could keep Azure Active Directory and Active Directory separate. And I don't know, with AWS, I don't know if IAM is tightly integrated with AWS, if it's kind of separate where you can use it with other things. Does anybody know? Is it mainly just for AWS resources?
Yeah, I think it's mainly for those resources. I
Okay.
haven't seen another way to leverage it. It's certainly, that's one area where I think they're a little behind AD.
Okay.
So,
Can you federate the two?
I don't know, maybe.
You guys aren't doing that then?
The funny part about that, when we first started looking at this, we were going to start with AWS, and then some business factors forced us to go into Azure first. But we found that AWS offered a managed Active Directory platform. So they had kind of a marketplace offering that would deploy dual Active Directory domain controllers and kind of manage those kind of as a PaaS offering. Azure didn't. It's kind of backwards.
That's
you know?
still, that was still outside of their IAM piece. Those aren't
Yes.
actually good.
Absolutely, yeah, it was. It's just kind of weird that they ran a managed service and Azure wouldn't,
Because Azure wants to sell their identity management solution.
which doesn't do everything that Active Directory Domain Services does. So again, Azure Active Directory is just identity, and it has limited capability to join devices to it if you use their Microsoft Intune services. But it doesn't do all of the Active Directory Domain Services things like group policies and
So
whatever else I don't know
If you really
about.
want to get full Active Directory in the cloud, you almost have to spin up a DC in the cloud.
Right. You either have to link it back to your on-premises one or spin one up in the cloud. All right. So in Azure, we'll quiz the AWS folks later. What are our critical accounts? What are the ones that we really, really need to protect? Absolutely, no questions. So in a non-enterprise account, when I mean that, I'm talking about I go out to Azure and I get my own Azure account and spin up virtual machines, or I get a Visual Studio subscription. The higher level subscriptions like Visual Studio Pro, they'll give you so many Azure credits per month. It's kind of cool. You can lab it out. So those are what I'm talking about. Usually have one subscription, one credit card you're putting stuff on. What are the ones that we need to protect? One's the global administrator. Kind of think of this as the root account for Azure Active Directory. It's just a generic administrator that has pretty much carte blanche privileges in the directory. You can create new users, invite users, delete users, do directory things like do the linking to your on-prem AD. You can create new little global administrators to run around. And you can do something we'll talk about briefly in a minute. You can elevate yourself as a user access administrator. The global administrator has no default privileges over Azure resources, Azure VMs, Azure storage accounts. You actually have to have an account owner assign them that privilege. Now, when you go out and get your own Azure account, your initial global administrator account is automatically granted that privilege because you have to have some way in it. But if you create other global administrators, by default, they can't do anything to virtual machines. Okay, and I can actually show you that maybe quickly. Okay, so like this account, which you probably can't see, it's just called Ed. And if you can see this, it says my role is global administrator. And I'm in this Trustworthy Bits subscription, which was the same one our Linux server was in. I'll go over here. I don't see the Linux server. So by default, when you create that global admin account, they have no privileges. Reason I tell you that is they have a function inside there that they can elevate themselves and give themselves privileges to be a user administrator for everything, which means they can grant privileges on virtual machines, including to themselves. So there's ways around it. They can do it. Kind of have to be able to do that in case you lock yourself out. Somebody has to have the account to do that. So anyway, global admin, root, big account you need to protect. The other one is the privileged role administrator. This is an account that's able to delegate other admins, so they can create other admins, and they can manage this privilege identity management that we'll talk about. So these are the two main ones that Microsoft recommends you protect because they're able to create and change users. And as we've seen, that's a big thing in the cloud environment. We want to limit how many accounts of these we have to the extent possible. You need more than one so you don't get locked out, but you don't want everybody being global admin. I mean, it's great, but not too great if you're trying to be secure, right? And what else? Enterprise accounts. We happen to have an enterprise account. That's if you're a big organization, you're going to spend a lot of money. You go to Microsoft, and it's not something you can order online. You actually have to talk to somebody and pay some money, and they give you an enterprise account. What does that do? It gives you, I'm sure it gives you a better price break. It's for accounts you're going to have larger users, larger sets of resources. You pay money up front and you get credits, and you spend those down through the year. At the end of the year, they could do kind of a true up, or you pay the overage. And it gives you a little more structure. You can create multiple subscriptions in your account. That just means it's for billing purposes. You can separate how the billing's done. And the main account in that's the enterprise administrator. They're able to create other administrators for the account, which means these are people that can spend money and lock people out of accounts. Pretty important. And then finally, they recommend to emergency accounts. Does anybody ever use emergency, like break glass accounts on their network infrastructure? Or
We have one.
how do you control that account?
We use CyberArk to control that.
What is that?
It's a credential management product. So basically, we're in the process now. It's really kind of cool. A presentation on it, but basically, long story short, you take all of your high-end accounts, all your elevated accounts, service accounts, you dump it into CyberArk, and then in order to be able to access that account, you have to go through a process and use a jump box, and it will provide you can either do auto login, but it force feeds the password, randomized password in, and then you can use a jump box. It records all your elevated sessions, so that, and then after you get done, it randomizes the password again.
That's cool.
All your DA accounts. So basically, it's got 10 CyberArk accounts. So it does away with DA. So we've not gotten there yet, but we're in that direction. So in this case, we have a break glass account in case our environment burns to the ground. We have a subscription with IBM Technical Services where they can come in and basically we can roll over to their hot site and they can run operations for us. And that's our break glass account.
Cool.
So that they have access to this account. So in case something happens, they can basically manage the account while they're speaking with the dead body.
So that system has a lot of checks built in.
Yeah.
You don't have one person that knows that password. Nobody knows that password really, and I'm sure it's doing a lot of logging, and you can audit when people have used that. That's good. All right, so yeah, their recommendation is at least 2 break glass accounts of global admin privilege, and those would be not assigned to any particular person. Maybe it's something you go to low-tech route to put the password on a slip of paper and put it in a safe somewhere. Who knows? There's a little more high-tech stuff you can do with it, but they are basically recommending 2 emergency accounts. And of course, we're trying to limit the amount of administrator privileges, but we do need to ensure the access to our data. All right, so how do we protect these passwords? Yeah, sure. You want strong passwords on all of them. Fortunately, only recently, within the last month, Azure Active Directory increased their password size. It used to be limited to 16 characters. They just increased that to, I don't know if there is a limit, maybe 255 or something. But they've joined the ranks of the good practices of password length. But we don't want just passwords. We're able to do multi-factor authentication, which really in this day and age for any kind of administrative account, that should be table stakes. That should be something that any system is going to bring and allow you to use, because pure passwords just not cutting it anymore for any kind of administrative stuff. Of course, you can do this in Azure, and AWS has this as well. This is just some background. Is everybody familiar with two-factor authentication or multi-factor? Anybody not familiar with it? No?
Some of my students might not be, so that's why I give a brief.
We'll go through it real quick. So traditionally you think of authentication as username and password. That's one factor. That's your password is the secret part of that. So we figured out that passwords are easy to guess. It's easy to find, written down on somebody's table. Let's do another method. And so they came up with the concept of multi-factor authentication, which is in most cases practically implemented as two factors. So now you need two pieces of information that hopefully only you have. And I kind of worded this oddly. So two-factor authentication requires two pieces of evidence, and it's typically two out of different categories here. So something you know, which is typically a password, that's something you remember. Something you have, like a smart card, like down here at the bottom is like a DoD CAC, something you have, or something that you are. I think if anybody has an Apple phone, you're familiar with the fingerprint reader. A fingerprint or a retinal scan, something high-tech like that would be something you are. So
most people have been using two-factor authentication for their banks for years. Can anybody tell me what it is? ATM cards. Something you have, something you know, right? That's two-factor authentication.
Yep. So in Azure, of course, Azure supports MFA. I got to pick on it a little bit. It's free only for the global admins. So anybody you have as a global admin, they give that to you free. Anybody else, you got to pay. I can't remember if I mentioned it earlier. The Azure Active Directory, just the basic service, it's free. You go out and it comes with Azure O365. You're not really paying anything for it unless you want some of their premium stuff, like multi-factor for all your users. From what I remember, AWS does offer multi-factor for all users. Is that ringing a bell with anybody? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some heads nod. They seem to be a little ahead on the number of services offered, especially something like this. Azure Active Directory allows multiple methods, text, SMS. Yeah, it's kind of falling out of favor nowadays, where they send you a text message with a code and you have to enter that in. Phone call, it'll actually call your desk phone and there'll be a nice message on there and you press pound and that's your second factor of authentication. It's kind of dubious. Authenticator app. Does anybody know what I'm talking about with that? TOTP, time-based one-time password. That's the applications you usually get on your phone. You'll scan a QR code or enter a web link and it'll spit out numbers, a sequence of numbers, usually 6 digits, maybe 8 digits. It's called a time-based one-time password. Basically what it is, when you're scanning, excuse me, when you're scanning the QR code or visiting the link, you're actually getting a seed. And that seed's known to you and the authentication service. And it's hashed with the current time, so you have to have a good time synchronization between the two devices. So that it's generating this code that both of them will be able to compute. They both know this initial secret. They both know the current time. They're computing the same number. You enter the number, the other checks it. It's all good. So that's what the TOTP is. Some of those will do a push notification instead, where the application just says, hey, there's a login. Do you accept, approve, deny? Okay. I've heard from some red teamers that those are sometimes easily spoofed, that some people have just clicked the button anytime that shows up. So something to think about. But anyway, Azure offers those. They've got a preview for the OAuth hardware token. That's kind of the RSA tokens. If you've seen some people dangle those on the lanyard, similar to that one-time password application. I think last I checked, AWS supports more than that. They support like YubiKeys, some different things. Anyway, you want to enable multi-factor authentication on your administrators. Role-based access control. When I said earlier we don't want to give root privileges to everybody, that's what we're talking about here. We want the least amount of privileges needed for people to do their jobs. So you definitely need somebody as global admin to manage the overall account, but the person that's adding users and changing passwords every day doesn't need the same permission. So we want to separate these. And this is what I'm talking about when I gave you the example of the user administrator going in and resetting a password. The roles that Azure has in place. Hello. We lost her. There we go. Let's see. If we look at the roles, we can't see much on the screen. Anyway, there's a lot of roles that are available in the directory. So these are all the roles that are available in Azure that you can assign to your administrators. So you have the global administrator, can manage everything. You have the user administrator that can manage aspects of users, not administrators, and they can do password changes. You have a different kind of administrator called the authentication administrator. They can do multi-factor authentication changes. So maybe if you have everybody doing multi-factor and you separate who can change passwords versus who can modify multi-factor authentication, maybe you're limiting somebody's ability to kind of pose as other users. Or
can a user be members of multiple roles?
There is a way to do that. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I don't know if you can assign a user as a permanent member of multiple roles, but with the privileged identity management, you can give them the option to choose from different roles. You can give them eligibility to assume different roles.
So they can never be the same role at the same time. They have to roll between different roles.
I think that is correct. I think. And nobody in here knows Azure, so I can tell you anything I want. Just kidding.
Sorry?
I said nobody else in here knows Azure, so I can tell you anything I want. I think that's correct. I think it's you are a particular administrator at a particular time.
So the authentication administrator can change like the SMS text messaging?
Yeah, they can basically what is it? They can clear what's on there. I think they can force the user to reset up the type of authentication that's used.
But the user still has to set up.
Yes, they're the ones that have to go through and set it up.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
Right.
Tweak that.
Yeah, I don't think you can't go in and register it for them. Right. Yeah. No. Slideshow go. Any other questions so far? Oh, okay. All right, points off for that. Right here. Okay. So again, separation of privileges. Talked about that. Of course, we're mapping back to the sys controls of limiting privileges. I don't even know why I have this here. Basically, what I'm saying is, it's just a reminder, Azure Active Directory, the role that you're in there, the user administrator, the global administrator, those are not the same roles that manage Azure objects, like virtual machines, things like that. All right. One last security thing, privileged identity management. This is a kind of a collection of functions that Azure offers. Again, it's a paid service that they do. But think of it like you're Dr. Banner, you're David Banner, and you walk around. I'm the Hulk. I don't walk around as the Hulk all the time. I'm David Banner. I go into a bar and I can drink. I can fit through the door, and somebody slaps me across the face, and I'm pretty pissed off. Now I want to do something about that. So maybe I have to go to Nick Fury and say, "Hey, man, dude slapped me across the face. I got to do something about this." And Nick's like, "Well, you got to write up justification for that, and you got to give me your ticket number. We got to log this, And then once you get that back, I'm going to approve it, but I'm only going to approve it for a limited time. You only got an hour to throw down, right? And then once you're done, I'm going to take that back away. You're going to have to convert back. And oh, by the way, I'm going to email the rest of the Avengers and let them know that you became the Hulk just now, and here's your justification." So, stupid example. I haven't seen the movie. Don't ruin it for me.
Actually really well done.
But that's kind of what we're talking about here. It provides a way to stop you from having users that are, or administrators that are walking around with their privileges all the time. With privilege identity management, your administrator can log into Azure, not have any administrative privileges, and go and request elevated privileges. And this gets to your question of, you can assign a number of eligible roles that they can assume. They can pick the role that they need and request elevation. It gives you granularity into what's required to assume that privilege. So if it's just something you want to protect them from leaving their laptop and the cat walking across it, yeah, you can say, you can log in and request elevation and you get it. You can assign the time-based elevation to where it only elevates it for a certain amount of time. Of course, that prevents you from walking away and somebody having your keyboard and now they have some great access. You know, maybe an hour later it's locked out. You can require some documentation. This is great for people that like ticket systems, IT service management systems that'll require a ticket number, maybe even a justification that you have to enter just to log that into the record. Hey, such and such, Ed needed global admin privileges and here's my justification. You can go a step further and require that that be approved by another administrator. So there's a particular role that's an approval role for these administrator escalations. So now you're getting more into, hey, why is Rob, you know, escalating to user administrator on Friday evening when it's no change Friday? You know, I'm gonna look into that a little bit. And of course, it's doing logging, and you can even have it do notifications to like a hunt group or an email group, or probably even text, SMS when that occurs. So you're getting instantaneous notification that somebody's escalating the privilege. So now we're talking about not just protecting against an external threat. Hey, somebody's logging into my global admin account, but even, you know, keeping an eye on things internally as well. So that's a service they offer. I did look this up on AWS. I know they allow you to assume different roles at different times. I'm not sure if there's a full parity between Azure and AWS here. I would imagine they do. They do about the same. Strongly recommended that you enable this at least on those critical accounts we talked about earlier, because you definitely don't want people walking around with those privileges. Just, that shouldn't be a daily account, right? And finally, monitoring. There's no real security without watching what's going on. If somebody's, you know, asleep at the desk, then people can do things and nobody's the wiser, right? So of course, auditing all this is critical. You got to be watching what's going on. Azure does offer sign-in logs, audit logs, so you can tell when people signed in, when they failed, why they failed, if they failed on the password, failed on MFA. There's audit logs for changes to the directory, so you can see when users are created, users are deleted, multi-factor authentication methods were changed, things like that. I believe this is CloudTrail in AWS, not totally sure, but they do have an equivalent function, seeing some north-south.
So Ed, all this monitoring here, this is all included, or is this, some of this a fee?
Some of this is a fee.
You're kidding.
No,
Microsoft
this is
making money off of this?
yes, this is a fail in my book. You know, you talk the security game, and then you roll out this product that hides a lot of this behind fees. You know, this privileged identity management. To give you an example, I think they have 4 levels of Azure Active Directory licensing. There's the basic, the free, the basic, Premium 1, and Premium 2. And of course, each one is incrementing in the features that it offers. They're charged per user per month with an annual commitment. And it gets up to like $10 a month per user for the higher levels.
But moving to the cloud is cheaper.
Oh no. That is a fallacy, and that is a fallacy we've been fighting for over a year. That was one of the big pushes that caused us to go to cloud, and there was a contingent inside that was warning ahead of time that, hey, this is not going to be cheaper, especially the way it was being done. We were more focused on just getting things there, which means forklifting your servers into virtual machines in Azure. And that's, I mean, Azure AWS, you're really not going to be saving a lot of money doing that. Your savings is probably more coming from using the more PaaS and SaaS services, I think. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And especially with stuff like this, the privileged identity management, the multi-factor authentication for non-global admins, to be charging for some of that, you know, it's kind of a,
Yeah, and now remember, a lot of the security aspects of it, like your security monitoring and things like that, there was a lot of fees associated with any of these things
Right.
that you wanted to turn on or turn up.
right.
It's a little bit more. So
I wanted
it's
to,
something to keep in mind.
for my personal account, I wanted to turn on monitoring of the admin logins. Just so I get an email when the admin logs in. Well, I found out that's a premium feature. I can't even monitor sign-ins without getting a premium Active Directory account. That's a pretty basic thing to know when somebody's signing into the global admin on your account. Was there another question? Two.
Okay, sure. All right, so where does this auditing go? Like, is it all email based, or can I shove it like do syslog to back to an on-prem server, or how does that auditing?
We would like to sell you a service for that. Is the answer that would come back. So in Azure, there's a few different logs. There's an activity log, which is kind of the overall, here are things that are VMs that are being spun up and just changes in the environment. There's a sign-in log. There's the Azure Active Directory log. You can view them on the portal. You can request them via the API. You can send those to what they call Log Analytics, which is kind of their log aggregation service, and it has a Splunk-like interface that you can use to query. It's supposed to be very nice and fancy. I'm not experienced enough in it writing queries to get some of the nice visuals, but you can do that. And in that service, they also have partner solutions. So they have kind of apps that have been written that can go in and query certain parts of data and do nice visualizations. Like they have one for the Azure Activity Log that'll automatically spit out some nice visualizations of the data in that. You can also send them to the equivalent of an S3 bucket, a storage account, Azure storage account. From there, you can put it pretty much anywhere you want it. Like in our situation, we send everything to a log analytics workspace, which is just a big dump of data. And then the people that are viewing that data take it all out and they put it in their own SIEM system. So you're not, for that, you're just charged based on the storage that you're using, the amount of storage that you use. And then if you're pulling the data out somewhere else and it leaves the region, you're getting data transfer charges for it. Yeah, and of course, any nice third-party application that you install may have extra charges on it. But I mean, at least you can get the data out and to where you need it to go. It's not like it's locked in. Yeah. Yep.
You pretty much answered mine. I was going to ask you if you were given a certain amount to charge beyond, but you pretty much answered. You pay for everything.
Yes. Yes, like everything in cloud. The first one's free. So you get your Azure Active Directory account, you get that for free. But if you want to do anything, you got to start getting into some paid
That's the
services.
gateway drug.
It is. It is. All right. So quick review. We're done. Yeah. So again, planning first. I can't tell you how much that really helped us in this environment, especially with the time, the schedule that was involved with us. It was a lot of work up front to kind of sit down and look at users and look at what are we deploying, how do things need to be separated so we're doing the right user separation. But it really pays off in the end because you don't look at an environment where users are scattered everywhere, nobody knows who has admin accounts, servers are named, Lord knows what. Plan ahead. Push that back on your PMs as hard as you can, but you're not going to win. So again, protecting your critical accounts, your global admin account, your enterprise administrator, your user administrators. You want MFA on that. If you can pay the money, which really, if you're going to start deploying a lot of stuff to cloud, you can pay a few extra bucks a month to do things like privileged identity management and get those extra features of escalation, just-in-time escalation. And don't forget emergency accounts. You don't want somebody, just banging away at the keyboard and locking out all your admin accounts with no way to get into them. And monitoring. It's not not going to help you if you're not watching what's going on. Bonus, I didn't even think about this, and I found a note when I was doing research for this. So O365, of course, uses Azure, and you can get a Office 365 account, email, and things like that. If you do that, don't use the global admin account as a personal email. You know, you don't want to be you don't want to get phished. You know, I think we're all smart enough to recognize a phishing email. But of course, if you're logged into Azure and you're clicking around on the internet somewhere, or somebody sends you an email with a link, and you click that link, if you're already logged in, they may be able to get you to run something without you knowing. So, yeah, don't forget that. Don't let the VP sign up as the global admin and use that account. Couple of links. I'll post the slides up to the thing, but just some best practices links that I pulled a lot of info from. And that's it. That's some of the user lessons learned that we had from Azure and securing the portal and accounts.
I'll tag on one thing to that. So when you do move to the cloud, just be aware that Microsoft has no clue what it is that you're putting in the cloud. Like, they don't care. You could be putting, and this goes with any of the clouds, because when I was doing the phishing frenzy demo, I used the Google Cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, I totally had a phishing server just up and running in the cloud. They could care less. So don't expect, if you jack up your server, if you're hosting a server there and you leave every port open, don't expect Google or Microsoft or Amazon to go, oh, it looks like you jacked this up. Let me help you out. No, they don't care. They will let you get owned in a heartbeat. And then when you call them for support, they're going to go, you're a moron. Good luck. So don't expect, when you actually host these things in the cloud, they're not going to help you secure your environment. It is totally on you to do that. So to your point, try to leverage things like platform as a service, which those things are securely locked down to only doing those things, or software as a service where you can actually just, where they've already done all the heavy lifting for you. So when you take it on yourself to host a server in the cloud, you own it. That means you own every aspect of the security, the care, and feeding. The only thing they're doing is they're just providing you just a place to put your crap. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Good point.
Well, the reason why you care is because you might be liable in instances if they use that to attack something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's nothing like getting a call and finding out that your server being used as a Bitcoin miner. That's never happened, by the way, but I'm just saying.
The only time I've seen somebody get some attention from that, we had a guy in the office that had an AWS account, and he was playing with some security tools, and he started scanning one of his own servers, and they actually shut off his account. They noticed the scanning activity, and shut his account off. He had the email pasted in his office there. But I know Azure used to say you had to get permission to scan in their environment. I think they've stopped that now, but yeah, they only.
AWS changed their policy too.
Okay.
You don't need to get permission to pen test their stuff or leverage their stuff.
Okay.
Attack platform. So
That's good to know.
I actually have some questions about Azure AD.
Oh.
Just because last couple of assessments I've done, actually I think most of the assessments our team have done have been hybrid environments, both on-prem and Azure AD. I noticed that on a lot of the assessments that I've done that the actual Azure portal is not protected with, like, they'll have multi-factor on Office 365, they'll have it on SharePoint, OneDrive, whatever. They won't put it on the Azure portal. And I've compromised user accounts, logged into the Azure portal as like a regular user, and I can query the entirety of Azure AD. I can even use their user account and like the Azure AD PowerShell modules that they have to
Right.
just dump all the users, all the group memberships, like all the resources, applications, everything that's in Azure AD with just like a standard user account. So I would say that, you know, from a red teaming perspective, there's a lot of information in there. I was super sad when I found out that, you know, like a default user, like I guess how it's configured, they can add up to 5 devices to Azure AD with like Intune by default. I thought, oh man, if I add my virtual machine to Azure AD, I'm going to get all the GPOs and the certificates and stuff are going to come down, and then I'll be able to like opt to this VPN. And that did not happen. And you touched on why that is.
So when you did that, was that just where the administrator, they knew enough to lock down the services with MFA that they were using, but they didn't think about the Azure portal itself?
I
And
did not think about no one in like the last like 6 clients of different clients have thought about locking down the Azure portal.
good lesson learned.
So there's like so much information in there.
Yeah.
So then we just started like spear phishing like people with like global admin access, and we bought global admin on Azure, and then we could just like create accounts or.
Yeah, because now you have the user to role mapping, you know who you need to hit.
So I guess keep that in mind from my perspective. I put MFA on that too. I didn't know if there was like a way to change that setting, you know, just wholesale, like if you're just a regular user, you're not an admin, you're not doing anything in Azure AD, like you just don't have access to this resource. Because there are resources within Azure AD that you obviously don't have access to because you don't have the roles.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, as far as like directory services and everything, it's just like having a standard user account on a network, and then you just like talk to the domain controller over LDAP. Then you get all the same information.
Yeah, I don't know why that's available.
It's so weird.
Doesn't make sense. You're right. It doesn't make sense to just leave that open to any regular user. It doesn't really need all the info.
And I can create VMs. I forgot about that as a regular user. I could just spin up VMs for that user with their resources.
If they had their group permissions set up weird or something, that's
It's nuts.
yeah, that's strange.
Make a note.
I'm gonna like cost them so much money.
Any other questions? One more.
So sort of off the portal, have you ever seen or have you ever thought about, I've seen some clients who they have hybrid environments who would use software-defined networking to overlay their cloud environment and then merge their on-prem with their cloud as a single unified network. Have you guys ever thought of that or have you discussed it? Or?
We haven't, because we made a decision up front to keep them separate. And those were, it was for 2 reasons. One was to keep the cost and billing separate. And then there were some political reasons behind that we didn't do it. I don't know of anybody doing that. I mean, I know there's different ways of connecting your on-prem environment in Azure with the express route circuits, VPN connections, things like that, where you can certainly do that. It just depends on your requirements, right? Yeah.
I see a lot of people do that with AWS resources, just like setting up a VPN tunnel from their internal network to all the resources in AWS and vice versa.
I worked with one company called Zentera, and they did an overlay SDN network, so it was flat. You could have 5 different branch offices, 3 main offices, 2 different clouds. It would all be a single flat network because they overlaid the entire thing.
That's interesting.
Which has some interesting security implications, both good and bad.
It's good being in.
On the multi-factor monitoring of the S privilege escalation or just the syslogging or whatever, is that a on-off service, or is that tiered, or can you select certain accounts that you want to be notified if there's changes to, like or is that you pay for the whole shebang or not at all?
You mean the alerts themselves, or? Yeah, the alerts you can configure. You can change configuration, who's getting the alerts and how they're getting.
Do they charge, like, let's say I just want my 5 most important accounts to be tied to that service. So I only want to pay for 5 highly privileged accounts if those are starting to do stuff when I'm not paying.
Gotcha.
Versus everybody pay for.
You know, I'm not entirely sure. I think you can do like granular assignment of the premium accounts. I think you can do that, but I'm not entirely sure because I haven't done that myself. So All right. Thank you all. Appreciate you coming in.
So there's still